Welcome to the Salt Industry Interpretation Center. During the next few minutes, we will show you the main features of the Torrevieja salt production. But first, you should get to know the lagoons of the La Mata Torrevieja Natural Park. Let's find out some interesting facts. The Lagunas de la Mata and Torrevieja Natural Park, declared a protected natural park by the Valencian community in 1988, occupies 3,700 hectares and encloses two lagoons, which are differently coloured. One is pink and the other one green. The pink one, called Torrevieja, located in the northwest part of the region, is larger as it occupies 1,400 hectares. The La Mata Lagoon, which is green, is located in the southeast of the park and has a surface of about 700 hectares. Both lakes are connected to the sea through canals or dikes. The pink-purple colour of the Torrevieja Lagoon is caused by the pigments of a type of bacteria that live in extreme environments called halobacteria. In fact, the reddish colour is due to a protein called bacterial rhodopsin, which is present in the membranes of halobacteria. We must also mention the role of the unicellular alga Dunaliella salina and the small crustacean Artemia salina. The first is responsible for the bright red colour of the lake in certain times of the year, while the Artemia salina is reddish because it feeds on halobacteria. There are nearly 100 species of wading, aquatic and marine birds and animals in the park. The wintering birds present include the osprey, the black-necked grebe, the greater flamingo and the grey heron. As for breeding birds, there are the stilt, the Montagu's harrier, the little tern, the gull-billed tern, Adowine's gull and the slender-billed gull. This natural park is established as the second most important colony of Adowine's gull in Spain. We must not forget the different types of vertebrates that inhabit this space, as the common toad, the gecko, various species of snake, rabbits, hares, hedgehog, weasels, and foxes. Due to very harsh environmental conditions, with scarce rainfall and high soil salinity, there is virtually no aquatic vegetation except for communities of halophytic plants, which have adapted their bodies to the high salinity of this area and are known as species of salt marsh. They include varieties of salicornia, reeds, saltwater shrubs, bushes, and evergreens. Now it's time to find out how, where and when salt is produced in Torrevieja. The salt production is located in the southeast of the Pink Lagoon in Torrevieja. Thanks to this environmentally and ecologically significant exploitation, it was possible to preserve this space in its original state. The process begins as the seawater is carried to the La Mata Lagoon. This process is natural, as the position of the salt lake, at 4 meters below sea level, is enough to open the gates of the La Mata Canal and allow the passing of water through it. As it reaches the Green Lagoon, the water begins to evaporate. In the beginning, this water contains approximately 30 grams of sodium chloride, known as common salt, per litre. After the water evaporates under the action of solar radiation and wind, leaving more salt, the concentration reaches an approximate 150 grams of sodium chloride per litre. It is at this point that water is carried to the Torrevieja Lagoon, where a concentration of 300 grams per litre is obtained. In this key moment, a process called crystallization begins, in which salt solidifies at the bottom of the lake, reaching a thickness of 1 to 6 centimeters making it suitable for collection. One of the most important characteristics of the salt lakes of Torrevieja is that there is no need to dry the lake during the production process. In other exploitations, such as the Santa Pola Salt Lake, in addition to having to mechanically pump the water, it is necessary to dry up the lakes in order to obtain the salt, which makes the landscape more barren and industrial. In the old days, the whole process was done manually. A man would stand in the lake and hit the slab of salt to break it, while another one would be in charge of turning it over and loading it into the boat. Nowadays, these operations are carried out by a specialized machine. This machine, which is similar to a tank, moves through the lake on a set of tracks and uses a blade that is inserted between the crystallized salt port at the bottom and the ground or the clay beneath it to lift it, loading it up onto a conveyor belt that carries it to the barges that are found on the side. The barges are trailed by means of another technological innovation, the tug. The tugs used are paddle boats, which are very similar to the old Mississippi river boats. Their use is preferred to that of conventional propeller engines, which is unviable due to the fact that the lake is not very deep. The barges are dragged to the middle of the lake, where they are downloaded onto an artificial island, where they are handled by mechanical arms which move them and unload all the salt onto a conveyor belt. Then, the salt gathered from the barges is lifted in special buckets and washed with a jet of water from the lake, or brine, while it is being moved towards an on-growing screw, in which it is cleaned with another jet of saline water, which washes away impurities such as clay and other salts that have crystallized together with the sodium chloride, such as gypsum. The salt then flows into the centrifuges, where it is finally washed with seawater, which eliminates all remaining impurities and dissolves all traces of other salts, leaving the salt spotless and white. After being washed, the salt is carried by conveyor belts and deposited in piles. These great mountains of salt are typical of the landscape of salt exploitations. Piles are an easy way to store salt and protect it against unkind weather, as rainwater runs down the walls of these salt pyramids without stagnating on their surface. This way, the dissolution of the salt is prevented. Then, the salt grains or pieces of very different sizes are ground in rollers in order to obtain the right dimension, depending on its final use. After the grinding process, the salt is prepared for the different uses it will have. The beauty of the crystallization process is uniquely captured by Torrevieja art craft. Models of ancient clipper-style boats made of cotton are placed in the salt marsh so that the salt adheres to the cotton, creating beautiful shapes of crystallized salt. These boats, encrusted in salt crystals, represent an exquisite gift from the city, the salt lakes, and nature itself. But seawater does not only contain sodium chloride. There are different percentages of other minerals such as calcium sulfate, more familiarly known as gypsum, magnesium salts, calcium salts, or bromine. This is why sea salt is so much more beneficial to the body in comparison with other salts. There are two basic types of salt, humid salt and dry salt. The humid salt is the salt resulting from the washing process described above. It's called humid because even after it is dried, it continues to maintain a 3% of humidity. The dry salt, however, will undergo another wash meant to leave it even whiter, and then passed through a furnace that will eliminate that small percentage of residual humidity. This last step gives it optimal properties. For example, it doesn't form lumps, which makes it adequate for certain purposes such as cooking. After grinding, the salt is passed through a special set of filters. The sieves consist of metal planks onto which the salt is placed, which have small holes through which the grains of salt pass. As the particles are of different dimensions, the ones that do not fit in these holes are retained. This is how the grains can later be sorted by their size and packaged accordingly. Once it has been ground and separated according to particle size, the humid salt is named differently according to its dimension: coarse salt, brine salt, stabilizing salt, ground salt, common salt, or superfine salt. As dry salt is the result of a more recent and modern process, it is given numerical cataloguing: type 00, type 1, type 2, 3, or 4. The process of salt crystallization begins in early June due to the heat and ends in October, when winter begins to bite in the salt lakes, filling them with rainwater and causing the crystallization to stop. The collection of salt begins at the end of June. To quote a popular saying, "It's figs and salt for San Juan." The collection may be extended throughout the whole year, as even when the production of salt stops, the salt remains at the bottom. The already crystallized salt does not disappear, despite the lowering of the level of salinity, since a total change of the water in the lake would be necessary in order to dissolve all the salt formed at the bottom. In addition, a foil of about 80 centimeters covers the crystallized salt or brine, acting as a barrier against new water or rainwater due to its greater density, and this way avoiding the disappearance of the salt. Formerly based on the natural process described earlier, the production of salt from the salt lakes was of about 300,000 tons a year. Today, thanks to the mechanization and modernization of the process, the production has reached some 700,000 tons. But this significant increase is also due to another factor. In 1970, we began to extract and transport salt from the Pinoso diapir, or salt dome. Diapirs are concentrations of underground salt water, which were formed more than 200 million years ago out of inland seas of the Tertiary period that evaporated and resulted in massive salt deposits. Over the years, the salt was covered with sediments and buried deeply beneath them. When subjected to great pressure, salt becomes fluid, that is, it turns into a toothpaste-like liquid and begins to flow upward in search of an exit. As a lot of pressure is applied on it during its ascent, it resolidifies, creating the so-called salt domes that are often mushroom-shaped. As it happens, one of these domes is in Pinoso. Salt is extracted from it through wells and carried by a 53-kilometer pipeline to the Torrevieja lagoon. This process improves the activity of the old salt lake facilities, especially as climatic conditions used to cause the salt production to plummet during seasons of heavy rainfall or intense cold, as the evaporation process and the production of optimum salt concentration were compromised. We must note that salt is a product with no less than 14,000 different uses. Although the most widely known one is the preparation of food, this use is, paradoxically, its least common purpose. Its use in processes such as the making of glass, the manufacturing of PVC, the textile, chemical, and pharmaceutical industry is much more common. The biggest consumer of salt is the chemical industry, which buys more than half of our production of salt. In developed countries from Northern Europe, large amounts of salt, usually humid salt, are used to stabilize soils, consolidate roads, and prevent people and vehicles from slipping on ice. Recently, it began to be used in the descaling of water, which now generates important consumption. Other, less important examples of use include the non-direct food industry, that is, the production of canned food and products for the countryside, animal feedstock, or prefabricated food. As mentioned earlier, cooking salt is the least significant in quantity, although it is undoubtedly the type of salt subjected to the widest variety of tests, like health control tests, packaging tests, transportation tests, etc. Some of the salt that is distributed directly in bulk, such as the salt used in soil stabilization or that used by brine food producers, is loaded directly onto trucks or ships in the case of the domestic market and on ships for the international market. An innovation of the salt lakes of Torrevieja is that the salt is carried directly to the ship by a conveyor belt that connects the salt production to the port via the Poniente Promenade. This way, the upload is very fast and its output is much more productive. Salt can also be packaged in 25 kilogram bags and big bags of 1000 or 1500 kilograms depending on the use. The Torrevieja salt lakes work with modern and efficient machines for packaging and storage. Our most important salt buyers are developed countries, mainly from Northern Europe. Norway is our main purchaser and uses the salt it buys both for soil stabilization and for its large fishing industry. Italy, Portugal, the UK, the US, Ireland and Denmark are also among our main buyers. National markets for the Torrevieja salt include companies from Galicia, Catalonia and the Basque Country. Torrevieja, charms to discover.